The medical bay doors hissed open as Jake Carter stumbled inside with the alien woman clutched against his chest, and her silver skin gleaming under the harsh lights and her breathing shallow and rapid, and something was very wrong because her body temperature had spiked in the last 10 minutes and he could feel the heat radiating through his uniform. And the ship doctor looked up from her workstation with wide eyes because humans did not usually carry wounded aliens through secure military vessels, but Jake did not care about protocols right now because the woman in his arms was dying, and he had made a promise. Dr. Lisa Hayes rushed forward with her scanner already humming to life, and she gestured to the examination table, and Jake lowered the alien woman gently, and her name was Zara. And she had told him that much before the pain had become too severe for speech, and now she lay trembling, and her large violet eyes filled with tears that looked like liquid mercury, and they rolled down her cheeks leaving gleaming trails. And Lisa began her scans while Jake stood close enough to hold Zara's hand, and her fingers wrapped around his with surprising strength. The readings made no sense, and Lisa frowned at the display, and ran the scanner again, and the numbers did not change, and she looked at Jake with confusion written across her face because according to every metric she understood, this alien woman should not be in distress. And her vital signs were actually stronger than they had been an hour ago when Jake had first brought her aboard after the rescue mission. And yet Zara writhed on the table, and her breath came in gasps, and she squeezed Jake's hand hard enough that his bones creaked. Lisa pulled Jake aside while her assistant continued monitoring Zara, and she spoke in low, urgent tones because the situation had become complicated, and the scans showed something impossible, and Jake needed to understand what they were dealing with, and she pulled up the holographic display and pointed to the thermal imaging. And there in Zara's abdomen were 9 distinct heat signatures, and each one pulsing with its own rhythm. And Lisa explained that based on her limited knowledge of Zara's species, these were embryonic life forms, and Zara was pregnant, and not with 1 child but with 9. Jake felt the deck shift beneath his feet, and he gripped the edge of the console because this changed everything, and Zara had not mentioned being pregnant, and he had carried her through a combat zone, and she had been struck by weapons fire, and he had given her human emergency medication. And what if he had hurt the babies? And Lisa saw his face go pale, and she put a hand on his shoulder and told him that the embryos appeared stable, but there was a problem. And the problem was that Zara's body was rejecting them. The biology was complex, but Lisa explained it as simply as she could, and Zara's species did not gestate young the way humans did, and instead they required a compatible genetic partner to stabilize the pregnancy through continuous proximity and biochemical exchange, and without that partner the embryonic development would stall and eventually fail, and Zara's body was trying to reabsorb the embryos to save her own life, and that was causing the pain and the fever and the distress. And Lisa looked at Jake with something like pity because she knew what came next. Jake returned to Zara's side, and he took her hand again, and she opened her eyes and focused on him with effort, and her voice came out weak and threaded with pain. And she said she was sorry, and she had not wanted him to know like this, and she had thought she could make it to her homeworld before the rejection began, but the mission had taken too long, and now it was too late. And Jake asked her what she needed, and Zara's laugh was bitter and broken because what she needed was impossible. She explained that her mate had died in the attack that Jake's team had rescued her from, and her mate had been human, and they had bonded in secret and created these children against all the laws of both their peoples, and human-alien hybrid pregnancies were supposed to be impossible, but they had made it work through love and determination and science, and now her mate was gone, and without a genetically compatible human to complete the stabilization process, the babies would die, and she would survive, but she would be empty and broken. Jake felt something twist in his chest because he understood loss, and he understood the weight of impossible choices. And he looked at this alien woman who had loved a human enough to break every rule and create life where life should not exist. And he made a decision that would change the course of his entire existence. And he asked Lisa what he would need to do. And Lisa stared at him because surely he was not suggesting what she thought he was suggesting. And Jake met her eyes steadily and said, Lisa ran every test she could think of, and she checked Jake's genetic markers against the fragments she could extract from the embryonic signatures, and the match was not perfect, but it was close enough that it might work, and human DNA had enough plasticity that his biochemistry could adapt to provide what Zara needed, and the process would require him to stay in physical contact with her for extended periods and allow his body to synchronize with hers, and essentially, he would become a surrogate partner to sustain the pregnancy, and Lisa warned him that there would be side effects and some might be permanent, and Jake said he understood. The first session lasted 6 hours, and Jake lay beside Zara on the medical bed with monitoring equipment attached to every part of both their bodies, and Lisa supervised while their biochemistries began to merge, and Jake felt warmth spreading through his veins like liquid sunlight, and Zara's breathing gradually eased and the pain lines around her eyes softened, and when Lisa checked the embryonic signatures again, they had stabilized and were growing stronger, and it was working. Over the following weeks, Jake spent most of his time in the medical bay with Zara, and they talked about everything and nothing, and she told him about her mate whose name had been Paul and who had been a civilian engineer on a colony world, and they had met during a cultural exchange and fallen in love despite the impossibility of it, and Paul had been brilliant and kind and had died protecting Zara when the raiders attacked, and Jake told her about his own losses and the people he had failed to save, and they found comfort in shared grief. The crew whispered about them because the sight of a human soldier lying beside an alien woman day after day was strange even by the standards of the interstellar fleet, and some thought Jake was a fool, and others thought he was a hero, and Jake did not care about any of it because he had made a promise and he would see it through. And besides, something unexpected was happening because as his body adapted to sustain Zara's pregnancy, he began to feel connected to the babies growing inside her, and sometimes at night, he could sense them moving, and it filled him with wonder. Zara began to show as the weeks turned into months and her belly swelled with the 9 lives within, and she laughed when Jake pressed his hand against her skin and felt the tumbling movements, and she said that human babies were so much larger than her species typically carried and that 9 of them felt like carrying a small army. And Jake grinned and said that sounded about right for human children, and they would probably be trouble from the moment they were born, and Zara smiled and said she was counting on it. The birth came suddenly one night when the ship was traveling through quiet space, and Zara gasped and clutched her belly, and Jake was at her side, instantly calling for Lisa, and the medical team assembled with practiced efficiency, and over the next 8 hours 9 tiny beings came into the world, and each one perfectly formed, and beautiful, and impossible, and they had Zara's silver skin, but human features, and they cried, with strong lungs, and reached for warmth with grasping fingers. Jake held them one by one, and something inside him broke open and reformed around these 9 small lives, and he had not expected to feel like this, but the bond that had sustained them through gestation had created something real and permanent, and when Zara looked at him with exhausted joy and said thank you, he shook his head and said no, and that he should thank her because she had given him purpose when he thought he had none left, and she had made him part of something miraculous. The Interstellar Council had opinions about the children, and there were debates and arguments and people who wanted to study them, and others who wanted to separate them, and still others who claimed they should not exist, and Jake stood before the council with Zara beside him, and he spoke with quiet conviction, and he said that these children were people, and they deserved to live and grow and be loved, and anyone who wanted to harm them would have to go through him first, and his record spoke for itself. And the council knew he meant every word. In the end, they were allowed to stay together, and Jake requested a transfer to a colony world where they could raise the children away from military, protocol, and political maneuvering. And Zara agreed because she wanted her babies to grow up free. And when they landed on the green world under alien stars, Jake carried 3 of the children, while Zara carried the other 6, and they walked together toward their new home. The children grew fast and strong, and they learned to speak both human languages and Zara's melodic tongue. And they played in the fields and climbed trees and asked endless questions about everything, and Jake taught them to be brave and Zara taught them to be kind. And together they built a family from grief and choice and love. And sometimes Jake looked at Zara across the dinner table surrounded by their chaotic, beautiful